Okay, in this presentation, we are going to look over chapters 3 and 4 from our book, Asking the Right Questions. We're going to look at a few questions from chapter 3 that I gave you to read over and to look for the answers. I'm going to go over a couple of these things here. One of the questions I asked was, what is the difference between reasons and evidence? This question is understanding the difference between reasons and difference is going to be important as we prepare for how we're going to apply some of these skills into the articles that we will be reading. So what is the difference? Well, reasons tells us why, okay? It explains and it provides a rationale for why we should believe a particular conclusion. So sometimes reasons can be the author's opinion. However, evidence tells facts, and these are facts that demonstrate the truth of the reason. So when an author gives you a reason, okay, tells you why, based on the author's opinion, why you should believe a particular conclusion, authors can provide evidence to support the reasons, okay? So while reasons can sometimes be facts, but then it also can be opinions. Evidence, however, are always facts. Another question I asked you was this one right here. It says the author uses the example of write an argument about your favorite video game versus what makes my favorite video game, World of Warcraft, a great game. To explain on writing a clear question for the question of an argument. Explain why the second question is more clear. While the reason why the second question, what makes my favorite video game, World of Warcraft, a great game, is better than write an argument about your favorite video game, is because the second question is more specific. It tells us specifically the video game, which is World of Warcraft, and it leads us to a specific conclusion. Okay, and on top of that, it makes it a much tighter and more focused argument. Because with video game, it's very general. So it could be any video game. In this situation here, we're talking about a very specific video game. So that makes it a much cleaner argument to listen to when the author is being specific. Another question I asked is, what makes up an argument? And so we talk about an argument, we're talking about typically a persuasive paper that someone is writing. And in an argument, you will always have reasons and you will always have a conclusion. So because we're going to be reading arguments, we're going to be specifically looking for reasons that the author used to support his or her conclusion. Another question I asked is, why do you need reasons first and then the conclusion? So this was on your quiz, and this is the last question on your quiz. And then what is the danger of starting an argument with a conclusion first? The reason support conclusions, okay? So when you provide reasons first, the reasons shape your conclusion. In other words, if you provide reasons why you need something, your conclusion of whether you need it or not, okay, is based on your reasons. However, if you start an argument with a conclusion, then you find reasons to make your conclusion more convincing, meaning that if you conclude something first, like I really need to buy something in particular that may be expensive, you're going to look for reasons to rationalize why you need that. And whether you really need it or not, your reasons may not support the conclusion, but you'll make the reasons fit the conclusion that you want. So that's the danger of starting an argument with the conclusion first. So most authors to be critical thinkers, most authors should start with their reasons and come to their conclusion. But as critical thinkers, we need to recognize if the author is trying to use the reasons to fit their conclusion, or if the author has reasons and then they are trying to find a conclusion based on the reasons. So those are a little different from each other. Chapter 4 had a couple of questions also, okay? And I'm only going over a few questions, not all of them. For chapter 4, one of the questions I asked you was explain the challenge with ambiguous words in an argument, okay? And when authors use ambiguous words, so when I use the word ambiguous, I am referring to words that can have multiple meanings, words that are vague or unclear, okay? Words that can be defined many ways, okay? So what is the challenge of using ambiguous words in an argument? First, you miss the point the speaker or writer intended. So maybe the writer meant one thing, but your definition, understanding the word, is another thing. So therefore, you don't have a clear understanding of what the author intended. If keywords are ambiguous, we need further clarification before we can judge the adequacy of the reasoning. And this is where panning for gold comes in. This is where you as the critical thinker are going to slow down, okay? You're going to slow down. You're going to ask, okay, whoa, wait a minute. What does this exactly mean? So those are some of the challenges with ambiguous words in an argument. One of my questions I also asked you was, the more blank a word, the more clarity there is for readers. And the correct answer is, of course, the more specific a word, the more clarity there is for readers. So if writers can define words, can explain what they mean, then for you as a critical thinker, you know what the writer is trying to say. But when a writer is vague, unclear, or ambiguous, okay, or the word is broad, too general, then it leaves room for interpretation, and many times different types of interpretation also. And then when you have different interpretations, that can lead to misunderstanding or you missing the point of what the writer is trying to say. Another question I had for chapter 4 is, how can you determine which words are keywords in phrase? So in this question here, I want you to focus on keywords in phrase, because an author can have ambiguous words like everywhere, but then how do you decide which words are important to clarify and which words are not important to clarify? And that's really what this question is trying to get at. And the correct answer is, you are looking only for keywords or phrases that is going to affect whether you accept the conclusion or not. So if there is a word that you encounter in an argument that is unclear and you really need this word to be defined before you can make a decision, that would be a key word or phrase, okay? Typically, these key words and phrases are found in the reasons and in the conclusions. And so that's where you're going to look for those keywords and phrases. Define the term happy 3 different ways. And so our book gave us an example of how we can look for ways to define words. Again, words can become ambiguous if it has multiple meanings. So the book gives us 3 different ways: synonyms, examples, and specific criteria. So if you have the word happy, a synonym is basically what is another word for happy. What is a word that means the same thing for happy? Well, joy, happy is feeling joy, okay? Now, an example of happy is what a parent feels when his or her child works hard and does well in school. So here I provide an example of what happy looks like, of what happy feels like, okay? And then the third way to define a word is specific criteria. Now, specific criteria, here's an example for happy, is happy is a positive feeling that overtakes you and makes you smile. You see, with specific criteria, it's a very specific definition. And notice in this specific definition, now it's not just a definition, but it's a very specific definition. that actually tells a person how it feels like, okay? And it goes into detail of what that feeling is like, okay? Which is overtakes you and makes you smile. So what happens if you exhaust all your sources to try to clarify ambiguity? What happens if you tried synonyms, you tried examples, you tried specific criteria, and you still feel like the author is not able to define what they are trying to say, or you can't figure out what the author is trying to say? As a critical thinker, okay, you do not have to feel like you have to react to anything that you feel is still unanswered or unclear. It is the writer and the speaker's full responsibility to clarify them for you. And if you don't see any clues within the paragraph, um, or you don't have any clues that helps you define that ambiguous word, you as a critical thinker do not have to make a choice. So remember, it goes back to that black and white. You can always stay in the gray anytime you feel like you are unsure, or you can see from both perspectives. As a critical thinker, don't ever feel like you have to be pressured to pick a side or come to a conclusion. All right, so in your book, there are some practice passages that the book provides for you to do. These practice passages are very, very important and very, very helpful in helping you understand how to apply the skills in both chapters 3 and 4. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of the passages. And then in this assignment on Canvas, you will have to do some practice passages yourself. So pay attention to carefully on my thought process and how I come up with my conclusion, my issue, which we covered in the last chapter. And then for this one, I'm looking specifically for what are some of the reasons that the author listed to support his or her conclusion. So in this paragraph here, we have popular women's magazines create unfair expectations of beauty for women. Most all the photos of women featured on the covers of magazines have been digitally enhanced by manipulating the lighting and measurements of the bodies of the women in the photo to look more attractive. Studies have shown that it is impossible for women to mimic some of the physical features presented on magazine covers because these features are literally manufactured by computers. The beauty that we see on the cover of magazine is not realistic, but instead computerized. So if you recall, we always look for the conclusion first if we don't know the issue, okay? So I can say that the conclusion that the author is trying to make here in this argument is very simple. Magazines do create unfair expectations of female beauty. As a matter of fact, it's the first sentence right here. The author gives us what the conclusion is at the start of the paragraph, okay? Now that I know the conclusion, okay, now it's easy to find the issue. And remember, the issue is always in a question format. Some of us are still not quite getting that, okay? The issue is always in a question format. So since my conclusion is magazines do create unfair expectations of female beauty, then my question that I'm really trying to answer here is, do women's magazines create unfair expectations of female beauty? Remember, my conclusion always answers the question of the issue, okay? So now let's look at the reasons, okay? What were some of the reasons why the author uses to support his or her conclusion that magazines create unfair expectations of female beauty? So when I go back and look at this, I see that one reason the author talks about how photos of women featured on the covers of magazines have been digitally enhanced. And another reason that the author concludes that magazines are unfair, do create unfair expectations of female beauty, is that it is impossible for women to mimic some of the physical features represented on magazine covers. So you can see that my reasons and my conclusion came directly from the argument itself. I'm not using my opinions in the reasons. I am simply identifying the author's reasons that he or she used to support their conclusion. Okay? All right, let's look at another example here. Okay, so again, I'm looking for the conclusion, the issue, and the reasons. And this passage is, with the growing costs of obtaining a college degree, a debate rages about whether students should attend a university. Is it still worth going to college? Obtaining a college degree holds several benefits. First, more and more jobs are requiring a college degree. This fact not only means that lacking a college degree will hinder someone's occupational options, but also means that having a college degree will put a person into a separate and higher category when employers are looking for new hires. Second, the type of jobs that require a college degree are often ones with above average wages. So not only will these higher wages lead to a higher standard of living than what would be achieved with only a high school diploma, but they will also help mitigate the costs of attending college. It's obvious that attending college is a great choice for securing one's future. Well, first of all, finding the conclusion and issue in this argument here is very simple because the author states it right in the paragraph. The author is straight to the point. Hey, this is what this is what my argument is about. This is what my conclusion is. So our conclusion is people should continue college, okay? The issue is should people continue to attend college? So what are some of the reasons that the author used to support the conclusion? Now, this author here writes in a way that is very, very friendly for readers because the author uses signal words, okay? So you'll notice that in the second paragraph, the author uses first, and then in the last paragraph, the author uses second. So those are signal words to indicate to us some of the reasons the author is using to support his or her conclusion. So one reason is many jobs require a college degree, and having a college degree sets you apart when applying for a job, and then jobs that require a college degree tend to pay more. So those are some of the reasons that the author uses to support their conclusion. Okay, so pretty forward this way. And some of you who have taken reading classes before, you can even look at reasons as supporting details for a conclusion. Okay, you can look at it that way also if you would like to. All right, so now what we're going to look at in the next two paragraphs is we're going to look at how to identify ambiguous words and phrases and explain why are those words ambiguous, okay? So this paragraph says school dress codes are limits put on inappropriate clothing to keep the learning environment focused. It can be quite a distraction for students if a classmate wears inappropriate clothing. The use of a dress code during school is not preventing freedom of expression. Unlike required uniform dress codes, the dress code still allows for students to choose what they wear as long as it is not deemed inappropriate. Okay, so what is our conclusion here? What is the author's conclusion in this argument? Well, the author is concluding clearly stating that schools should enforce dress codes. So remember, now that I found my conclusion, finding the issue is pretty easy. The issue is in a question format, okay? So should schools enforce dress codes? Now, let's look at some of the terms that the author used that could be ambiguous and is not very clear. And it raises some red flags to say, okay, well, wait a minute. What does the author exactly mean when he or she uses this particular word? So as I look at this paragraph, one word that pops out to me that it can be ambiguous is the word inappropriate, okay? The word inappropriate is ambiguous because to me, I'm questioning what is considered inappropriate. What is inappropriate to one person may not be inappropriate to another person. So maybe shorts that are past your knees is appropriate clothing. And then to some people, if anything above the knee is considered inappropriate. So again, that word is ambiguous because how people define inappropriate is very different. Another word that stood out to me that was ambiguous was the word quite a distraction. Okay, it can be quite a distraction for students. So my thought is, when I saw that, is what does quite mean? This is vague. Okay, how much is quite a distraction? Is quite a distraction a lot of distraction, or is quite a distraction just minimal distraction? So again, the word quite is a little vague. And so when you are, as a critical thinker, when you're looking for ambiguous words and phrases, you're really panning for gold. You're saying, well, wait a minute, I can't really make a decision on this argument, whether I support it or not, because some of these terms are a little vague, and how people would interpret them can be very different. So therefore, the author would need to expand or explain some of these terms a little bit more in the argument before I feel like I can agree or disagree with it. All right, so let's go ahead and look at one more example. And in this example, I'm going to look for the conclusion, the issue, some of the reasons that the author used to support his or her conclusion, and then I'm also going to look for some ambiguous words and phrases and why, explain why they are ambiguous. Electronic tablets should replace textbooks in K through 12 schools. Proponents of tablet use assert that tablets are more cost-effective, are more time-efficient, and take up less space. For example, tablets cost less than textbooks and also positively impact the environment by lowering the amount of printing and paper usage. In addition, one study completed in California shows that students who use interactive tablets scored significantly higher on standardized tests than students who studied with print textbooks. All right, so in this argument, the author's conclusion is that yes, electronic tablets should replace books in K-12 classrooms. So remember, finding my conclusion first makes it much easier to find the issue. We know that based on what the author is writing, the author is for the use of electronic tablets. The author is in support of using electronic tablets. And so because I know that, my conclusion is yes, electronic tablets should replace books in K-12 classroom. So my issue is, should electronic tablets replace books in K-12 classrooms? It's easier to find the issue because I can use the same language in the conclusion for the issue, but except it's in the question format. So what were some of the reasons that the author used to support his or her conclusion about using electronic tablets in the classroom? Well, one reason is the author says they're cheaper, they are environmentally friendly, and it says student standardized tests are higher when using tablets. Those are the reasons, okay? Now, were there any ambiguous words or phrases that stood out to you, and explain why they were ambiguous to you as you read them? Well, when I was reading them, there were a couple words that stood out to me. One was the word proponents. It says proponents of tablet use assert that tablets are more cost effective. So this is ambiguous to me because who are they? Who are proponents? Be specific. Okay, proponents just tells me it's very general. I don't know who they are. Another ambiguous word that stood out to me was the word more cost effective and more time efficient. Well, what is more? How much is more? Okay, is more a whole lot, or is more just a little bit more? And so again, what is more? So more cost effective, more time efficient, how much is more? That's way too vague for me. And then the opposite of more is less. Okay, the author uses the word less several times. Less space, less than textbooks. Okay, lowering amount. How much is less? Okay, is it a lot less or just a little less? So again, and there are several additional words that you can find as well, but these are just a few of the examples that I wanted to point out. Again, when we are looking for ambiguous words and phrases, we are panning for gold. We are saying, look, these words need additional clarification because how people interpret them can be different. And I cannot fully understand your argument, nor can I fully support it until I understand what these words specifically mean or what you intended them to mean.